And this, like I said before, this event is co-sponsored with the Inner Loop, which cultivates and promotes the distinctive literary culture of Washington, D.C. through low to no cost programming for writers of all backgrounds and experience levels. Women Surrounded by Water, the book that we're here to celebrate, is the Inner Loop's April Authors Corner Spotlight. Authors Corner supports local authors' independently published books by spotlighting them in community programming and collaborations. Find out more through the link in the chat. A couple more things before I pass it over to our guest this evening. We do welcome audience questions, so please, as questions come up, put them in the chat window. We'll try to get to as many as possible throughout the conversation. And lastly, I already held up a copy of the book, but if you do not have a copy, which you definitely should get one, please purchase a copy. We're putting a bookshop.org link in the chat, but I encourage you to pick up a copy from your local independent bookseller, request it for your library, all of these things to support our author this evening, Patricia Coral. So I think that's all of my information, and I'll pass it over to Shayla.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you all. I am so excited to talk to Patricia Coral, who I'll have introduce herself a little bit, but first I'll just say that I first met Patricia through her work. I was reading for a fellowship and I really just was enamored with her work, and then found out we went to the same MFA program with Emily Holland as well. And so it just feels like a really synchronous moment to get to be here with Patricia now. And Patricia, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit before we hop into everything?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I love being with the community of writers and storytellers, so I'm very excited that you're here tonight. My name is Patricia Coral. I'm the author of Women Surrounded by Water. I write primarily nonfiction, but also poetry and fiction as well. I consider myself like a little bit of everything, not just one genre, but primarily nonfiction is what's very close to me. Like not only my work, but I love hearing others people's work. And I think that's all I say about me. My bio is at the event and other places, and I don't think I'm a fan of talking too much about me. But thank you for being here. And I'm very excited to be in conversation with Chet'la. Like I'm a huge admirer of her work. So this is like a dream for me today. Thank you.
This is a delight for me as well. I was rereading your book this week and thinking to myself, wow, this is just so wonderfully crafted, and I'm so excited to get to chat with you. And I wondered if you might read for us just that The Women Who Test the Waters, and Patricia, to sort of introduce yourself with that first section.
Sure, I will do that. The woman. The woman who tests the waters, Patricia. I was raised to fear the water, and I grew up in a Caribbean island. It was like being raised to be afraid of myself. They didn't teach me about my strengths, only the dangers of who I was. I was raised to believe that water could kill me, that I could drown any minute. The beach was dangerous, and I should stay safe on the shore. I was born in a body they named woman to a family that prefers men. I was born a redhead in a country of brunettes, strong-willed for a woman, too talkative for a student, too thick, too masculine to be feminine to be masculine. I was born to everything, an excess, always out of place. And I was not a man. I was supposed to obey. I grew up between unwanted stares and invisibility, excessive control and disproportions. And sometimes there was also love when I didn't feel I had to try to apologize for being who I was.
Thank you so much. For those of you who don't know, this is a memoir, but the memoir it absolutely is who you are. And it is not apologizing for being a full self. The memoir moves between photographs and lyric meditations like the one you just read, poems, and it comes together in this beautiful braided hybrid space. And I'm sure that you're tired potentially of talking about the structure, but I wondered if we could start there. Like it to me reads so much like a book of poems and a memoir at the same time. It starts with like that lobby poem or proem, as we usually call it, trigger warnings, and then it's in these three sections that unfold with, like I said, photos, poems, lyric meditations, prayers. And I guess I just wonder how you decided that this was going to be in such like a lyrical hybrid shape, and if you could talk about the act of composing this book a bit.
Yes, I think it was more like an organic process. I really believe like us as writers are also artists, and I think I'm a huge advocate for us to following like our creative instincts, not necessarily what rules or different genre structures are asking for us to do. So I think I honestly, I just started writing about all my obsessions and the things that were in my head. Initially, I thought, okay, I think I'm going to write three potential books in with these topics. Like I wanted one topic to be about womanhood, and then I wanted another one to be out about my relationship to my ex-husband, who was he suffered addiction, issues of addictions to drugs, and then another one like thinking about Hurricane Maria and the island and immigration. So I always thought like, oh, I might have three different projects, and they might, I mean, the sky was the limit. They could go like in any potential directions. And then I have some readers and they were saying, well, maybe you actually can make all these work together. But it all started with the obsessions. And I think in that obsessions, I didn't have like an order or a structure for the book initially. I just started following my instinct and the different topics and the different pieces. And I was very authentic in the way that I needed to write every piece. Like I felt there were pieces that this was meant to be a poem, and this was meant to have it was a response to a photograph, like it was all, I guess, the process of that it's on my head, and also my instinct as a writer, and I think also how memory operates in many ways. So the pieces came first, and I think in this way it's very similar to how poetry collections work, right? Like I feel whenever I talk to poets, they are just creating work, right? We're working on poems,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually either they know they're writing to a topic, or other times it's just they've been writing and then they realize, oh my God, I have a topic, a whole collection here, and I'm sure you can speak. So I think in this way, I would say my book operates very much like a collage. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the potential right way of describing it. And I think that was also the way that was my creative process. It's almost like you have all
Mm-hmm.
these pieces and you're bringing them together to create something else, right? So in that sense, there were pieces that were initially longer, and then I realized these are actually speaking to these other pieces, and I started like just breaking them up and just
Mm-hmm.
them throughout the book. So I think if I had to describe the process, it was definitely a sort of collage, and definitely I think the creative process was more similar to that of poets, that when you hear potentially people that are working as fiction writers, they usually tend to have some sort of idea of a plot, even if they don't have an outline. They kind of know where they're going. But I think it was more, I think I cared more about the emotional landscape and trying to convey those emotions for
Mm-hmm.
others. And that's the way I organize the work. And each piece is written in the way that I thought they should be written.
Yeah, I love how you're talking about it as collage and sort of this organic emotional landscape that developed. But as you were, I wonder when you were actually editing the book, not necessarily the writing in the initial stages of the pieces. You're laughing because I'm assuming editing was a lot of moving pieces. So
Nightmare.
was it a physical, tactile thing? Like, did you print it and move it around? I'm always interested what other people's editing process looks like.
Yes. So there were times that I had to print. I don't know if people will benefit to see. I think might be in case you haven't read the book. There are pieces like these. I don't know if you can see. Like they're pictures with pieces, prose poems, I would say, or short snippets, narration, vignettes, however you want to call it. Yeah, I think we have a lot of labels. And they're longer pieces. You can see like this, but even the longer pieces are a little bit more fragmented. So it's not traditional narrative, it's more fragmented. And then you have occasional poems here and there. So I just wanted for you, in case you haven't seen it, for you to be a little bit more grounded in the conversation. So remind me, you were asking about the editing process, if I had
Yeah,
to
so like
print.
I wonder, was it like a printed sort of, I tell my students sometimes it looks like a murder board, like you just spread them all out and be like, how do these triangulate? How do they talk to each other? Or is it, are you moving documents around on the computer? I guess I just want to know about your
I need like
process.
something very tactile. I'm sorry, like the environments and the trees.
I
I
know.
definitely need a few trees before I die. But definitely I had to print it a few times and it took different shapes. Like at the beginning, honestly, I couldn't find its shape. I knew they belonged together, but I had a really hard time understanding what will be the shape of the book. And then I just started to moving things around. And I think whenever I print them out, I think like I primarily eventually organize it. Yes, a little bit. The ones that I felt were reflecting or speaking to each other in some way, maybe the topics or maybe the emotional landscape that was happening at the moment. So in a way, I started organizing it by having these pieces mirror each other. I think eventually the main driver was potentially the emotional landscapes. So I think it's not necessarily linear, but I would say it has some linearity to it in terms of it covers about, you know, these different things that happen were in a long period, well, since childhood technically, but me considering and
Yeah.
thinking about it like I would say a few years of my life, probably 10 years of my life there. So it's almost in some sort of order, but I also played with timeline structure, like different things. So I think
Mhm.
eventually it was mostly arranging it by the emotional stuff. And then I have having great readers. I think that's another thing that's very, very, very helpful. I don't know. Yeah, they just sometimes have so much insight on how to, you know, see things that you're not seeing. So I truly appreciated having amazing
Yeah.
readers.
I feel
Mhm.
like oftentimes we talk about writing as a solitary act, but it's such a
Mhm.
community oriented project because we're sharing it with people, but also like in the end, the goal is to share it with people. But in the process, when you can't see through the weeds, you're like, help,
Mhm.
what am I doing here?
I totally agree. I definitely don't know where I would be without the community. I don't know, maybe not only the book in terms of writing. I think I what
Mhm.
moves me to write is and to also like be with other writers is like I think there's so much power in this exchange of life stories. And I think it's
Mhm.
in that connection that we feel less isolated and potentially the things we're writing make other people feel less isolated. So I think it's definitely an exchange, but I also feel that I've been very lucky to find an amazing community in general. Like it has been a generous community of writers. And I would say, particularly DC, I felt I've been in DC only 4 years. And I feel like DC has been just amazing to me. The community of writers here has been, it feels like I've belonged here since forever. So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I respect the people that can work on this you know, by themselves or in a lonely way. I definitely cannot. I definitely need the community, yeah, to make
Yeah.
everything happen.
Yeah. And I mean, you're talking about community and sort of connection. And one of the questions that I had was actually about the fact that the book has so much transmission, translation, and communication, like
Mhm.
the news, text messages, phone calls, social media. And there's this big, it feels like there's this need for communication. There's also miscommunication, lack of communication. Um, and I guess, and we have both English and Spanish in the book. And I guess I wonder how a memoir for you is an act of translation of the self, a transmission of the self, but also what do you feel like maybe sometimes gets lost, or what do you grapple with in terms of that active transmission and translation as a memoirist?
Mhm. So I think there are different layers to that. First, like my first language is Spanish, and not only Spanish, like I have a master's, I moved to the US when I was 30. So I have even my literature, like a master's in literature and linguistics in Spanish. So I studied all my life and lived in Spanish. I actually started writing in English because I moved to Houston, and ironically, at that moment, there was not a community of writers that were writing in Spanish. So I really wanted community, and I started writing in English. So I feel not only as a memoirist, I'm translating myself and my experience, and I will go into that, but also like keeping in mind that I'm also translating all these experiences from one language to another. And then when I'm that's the first step of translation, is shifting, like changing languages. But then also there are many things, because like there are these experiences that it's very difficult to put on the page, and you're translating what you lived at that moment. But then at the same time, I'm not talking about language here. It's literally this experience, the way I lived through it, and how can I put it on the page that it's fair to that experience, and that readers will understand how it felt or how it was. um, so that it's in itself an act of translation, and I think that's beyond language. I think that's the I think that's probably the writing struggle, right? Like, how can I put this on the page that it comes alive, pretty much. um, and then yes, definitely all these moments where they're using text messages, I'm using different devices to try to convey this bigger picture. I remember when I was starting at one of early in my writing endeavors, trying to write. I remember in the workshop the famous uh, show Don't Tell, and I struggled a lot with that, because personally I'm not a fan of descriptions, or I'm not a fan of having to read long things. I think I like the economy, and I like that's what I love about poetry. I think that's potentially like a poetic mindset. But I love that economy of words, things that are very punchy. And then I thought, okay, if I don't want to be writing a lot of describing how this day was or what was going on, how can I achieve the same impact without enough words? So in a way, it's how you translate that experience to the page, and which devices are you using to translate. In my case, I decided to use the white space of the page. I think that's one of the devices that I use the most. And also, I feel like silence is one of the other devices I use a lot. Like, I think I leave a lot unsaid, and I think I use a lot of the page as a canvas, like as a white space. I think about this work more as a potentially a visual artist than necessarily writing. I think, what can I do on the page that convey this emotional landscape, that convey these experiences, and at the same time, I can have economy of words. And I think my biggest allies were like economy of words and the white space. That's how I
Yeah,
try to.
I thought about white space a lot in your book, which I feel like in hybrid memoirs, there's so much more space for it. So like in a traditional memoir, we often don't have the same type of white space. But I think about like in The Dream House, or I'm trying to think of others in this moment. My mind's going blank, but that we have all of this intentional white space to give us time to meditate as a reader. And I really loved that there are a series of prayer poems in here. And each one, for those of you, I'll show you, like it says inhale and then a sentence and then exhale and then a sentence. And I thought about how like the white space is also like breath pacing so much. Like we're asked to inhale and exhale, particularly in the pacing of the storm hits, which is where Hurricane Maria hits. You're trying to contact your family. There's this incredible pacing and moments where you just have one line or one sentence, and then these bigger blocks. And sometimes the sentences are long, and sometimes the sentences are really short. And I guess I just wonder how you were thinking about pacing in terms of those sections that are longer and a little bit more, I guess, maybe traditional vignettes. Were you also thinking about white space and pacing in those sort of longer chunks as well?
I think yes. I think yes, and I think not necessarily in the same way that you think for a poem. When you think about white space, you're thinking also potentially in line breaks. You know, there are many things that you think for a poem, but I think in those spaces, one of the things that I really begged, not begged because they were so good that they accepted very quickly, but I think it was very important to me that between the supposedly paragraphs, there was like an extra space. Like usually they do only one. I ask for two. In my heart, I want like, you know, four. But in reality, of translation, right? One thing is my creative idea. Like I really want four
Yeah.
spaces here. In reality, I cannot have anyone spending so much in printing a book just because I want so much more
I
space.
don't know.
So
I think next book, push them on it. Say I want all the white space.
maybe I could, but I think I was too shy, maybe. But but I think at the same time, I feel like okay, I can accomplish it what I want a little bit with that extra space. I didn't want it for it to read just as typical modular. Like I wanted an extra space so people could have a breather. But more than people, I feel that's the way it feels in my heart. That's the way it is on my head. You know, like that okay, let that sink in, you know, and keep going. But at the same time, I feel, well, I don't know, you will have maybe other opinion, but I feel that one also has certain urgency. So it's a combination of those spaces to breathe, but at the same time, that anxiety that feels like you cannot breathe. So I think it's a combination of the breathers and not breathing. So I think in general, it's just like, yes, I was thinking about white space, but it was different. It was more like, I just want these tiny snippets of memory. I think in a way, even the longer pieces is the way that memory operates. When we think about it, it's very rare or unusual, at least at the early stages, especially of traumatic events, that you have a full narrative created. You mostly jump from one memory to another, one thought to another. So I think a lot of that is there on that work. I think yes, maybe with time and you know when time passes, you look back and then you created a whole narrative of that difficult period of your life. But I think when you're experiencing it, it's very very like seeing like short visuals of what's going on, or memories are more like short visuals of what happened. So I think it's more in that sense. It's more like in memory. I think definitely is a lot of traumatic, and I think traumatic experiences, and I think also it's like I feel there are life experiences that are bigger than words. And it happened to me that when I was in Houston, I went to Cy Twombly Gallery, and my mentor at the time, I was struggling writing about my exes, my ex-husband drug addiction. I was struggling writing about all these difficult experiences because it's like, how can you say so much? This was an experience that is bigger than life. And she took me to a Cy Twombly Gallery, and the first thing she asked was like, how do you say the unsayable? I want you to walk through the gallery and think, how do you say the unsayable? And as soon as I got in, I just started crying in the gallery because I felt like the works that are there about, I mean, Cy Twombly work that it's there, it's very much like, for me, it was at that moment, I'm not talking as a visual artist, I don't have that background. I interpreted as someone that, as a visual artist, he lost the image. So he's scribbling. You know what I mean? And it made me feel like there are times that the experiences, in that case, it was work about war or things like that. So how do you depict that? Well, the truth is like I cannot. So let me just depict my panic in that moment, you know, or the different that I cannot pinpoint. So I think the same happened in this writing, which is like, in a way, I cannot really fully create a very full narration, but I have little words to try to, less words to try to say a lot, because this is bigger, and I hope that the reader completes that, you know, like in a way there is a work that I feel the reader does, understanding that it's bigger than what I'm conveying.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking about how the white space in different points communicates other things, and I agree. Like when the storm hits, I feel like I'm sort of holding my breath in those white space seconds, in those white space moments where I'm sort of waiting as a reader for what comes next. Like, oh my gosh, what's about to happen? What are we going to hear? So I do think that it's interesting the way that white space evolves and shifts throughout the book, which again is something that makes it feel like a poetry collection, because you enter each poem with a new sort of frame of mind and understanding, and you're asking us as readers to be in an ever-changing landscape with you, and an ever-changing emotional landscape as you sort of re-enter these stories, look at them differently. Because that middle section of the book, the ex-husband he's sort of there, but not really. And then we fully return to him in the third section of the book. And there's this way that's like, he's still here. Nothing's changed. We just had different focuses, the way that we sort of evolve, like where our concerns are at any given moment. So I really appreciate sort of that shifting landscape that you're asking us to be in with you. It feels like the waves, right? They lap on the shore, they recede, and we come back and forth with you, you know, about the grandmother, about the ex-husband, about the self, the body, the experiences of womanhood. They're all sort of like these ideas that are lapping on shore, which is really wonderful. I have a question about I think there's really a lot of emotional complexity in the individual sort of people, characters, etc. And I imagine there are other people who are memoirists in the room or working on memoir, and you do such a phenomenal job of presenting characters with complexity, including the self. One of my favorite ones is the one who exchanges cages, where we're talking about the speaker connecting with I'm using speaker as if we're talking about poems, but we're doing it. The speaker connecting with a man over like their shared embattled and warlike experiences, him being from Palestine and Gaza, and then the speaker's own sort of warlike experiences. And those characters in that moment are both so complex, because quickly we shift to find out that this person is partnered and that our speaker is like, and I saw him for a little bit longer. And this person comes back when the storm hits, and I almost forget because of the care and generosity. I'm like, wait a minute, this person is partnered as well. And I think there's a real talent and knack for presenting people as full characters. And I guess I just wonder how you approach developing full-rounded humans as a memoirist.
Yes, I think it's very complex. I think overall it's potentially the way I see most people too. Like, I think that plays a role. I think we have amazing sides to ourselves, and then we have other sides that are really not. Like, in a way, like trying to have compassion for other people and understand where they're staying. I people that will always be like more on the side that they're not that good, and then I think there are other people more nuanced, right? But I think in a way, I don't know. I think I try to be careful the way I present people. I think potentially one of the things, like a lot of people talk about, oh, I was worried personally, for example, how I presented my ex-husband, right? Because it's like, in a way, he had amazing things, but then he has this old struggle. And I guess, like, in a way, it's a lot of compassion. I think it's an approach with compassion. And I think one of the key things was like not being bittered when I was writing things, you know, like I think, I mean, I can be bittered and write a lot, but I mean, like when you already have the pieces that are going out, then I think there is some processing that should have happened, I feel, right? Before, in order to process things. And I don't like personally when I read books or memoirs that I feel, oh, this is too fresh, because there is a lot of still bitterness here. Like it feels more like getting back at people than necessarily processing your life, not processing, but necessarily revisiting your life in a way. So I think it's a lot of that. It's like having more emotional distance at the moment when I'm not talking about journaling and other things. I'm talking other pieces that are meant for public, having more emotional distance, and in a way they become characters. Not only they become characters, there are many times that I have an author's note at some point that I merge characters, like I change certain identities. That's something that many memoirists do. It's not, I didn't invent that. But
Yeah.
but that emotional distance, and then understanding what were the traits of each person that will convey the truth in this, right? Not necessarily it has to be exactly how they were necessarily.
Yeah. I have a
I mean,
follow-up question to that, but I also want to, oh,
for example, taking two different people and merging them into one, because that person is not about that person, it's about what that role was of that person or that type of people in the character, in
yeah.
the story. Sorry.
I have a follow-up question, but I do want to just point out, Emily dropped in the chat, don't forget to post questions if you have them. So if you do have questions, please post them in the chat. I'll be looking at them. And actually the follow-up question, I'll point out Erica's question and then ask my follow-up question, which is, what things helped you develop that emotional distance
I
to
think
write
a
about
lot
those
of
characters?
journaling. Yes, I think a lot of journaling. I think actually I came back to writing through journaling. It's funny, I think I've shared in other places, but when I went through my divorce, I stopped writing for about 10 years. I used to write when I was a kid, and I stopped writing during my 20s. Throughout my 20s, I didn't write. And then when I went through a divorce, I was so obsessed about so many things that happened that I thought, oh my God, if I keep calling friends to have them go over everything again, I'm going to not only be divorced, but also not have friends. So then I decided to just started to write down, in a way, my obsessions, right? Or the things that I was ruminating about. And that's how pretty much like my journaling habit started. It has been, I think, my main writing practice for the past 10 years, almost 11 years. So I think a lot of in that space, I think I revisit my life more, and I create this narrative for myself. And I think I come up with conclusions that I wouldn't be able to come up in other ways. So I think definitely journaling helped. I think also understanding the complexities of people. I think that played a role. I think that doesn't apply to everything that happens in your life. There are times that people just did terrible things to you that you didn't deserve, and that there's not nuance on that. But I think definitely journaling help, therapy help, friendship helps. And yeah, and honestly, the spaces of creative nonfiction workshops, I think there is some magic I feel to the creative nonfiction workshops, because I think it's such a vulnerable space and everyone is sharing their experiences. And I think in that connection with other people and their stories and their humanity, I think there's a lot of healing. At least there was a lot of healing for myself, even though the ultimate goal is not necessarily heal. It might be like a side effect, but I'm glad about that side effect. So I think that, and
Yeah.
time, there's that eventually time, I think, puts things into perspective.
Yeah. You have a great quote in Boxes to Carry. You write, I wanted to learn to close wounds. And it's reference to sort of the father's work as a doctor. And I often say to people, writing is therapeutic, but not therapy, and that the writer must care for themselves in the writing process. And I think you talked about this a little bit, but like, what did you do to care for yourself when you did this heart work and this difficult labor of sort of writing and investigating the subjects in this book?
I think my main thing was like, I don't believe in being tortured artist or tortured writing. You know, I think you don't have to put yourself to the trauma again. You don't have to go to places that are still too painful to go to. So I think having that boundary with my writing, even though I feel writing is my life, it's probably the thing that I love the most on earth, and also my friends and family. But you know,
Those two.
yeah, yeah, I forgot them. But I think putting that boundary, like I'm not willing to re-traumatize myself. And I went, whenever I was writing a difficult scene or a difficult moment, I just went to the place that I was ready to handle, that I could manage. if I found that, okay, this is too difficult and it's bringing me back to that same space, like I just stopped and did something else.
Mhm.
And I think it took me a long time to understand that, way before I was working on this memoir. But I think the self-care is crucial, and I don't think we need to torture ourselves for art or for writing. And I think there are things that are not meant for others. Like I have many things that I didn't include here. And I made the decision, you know what, it's too hard for me to write about that. People
Mhm.
don't need to read it. I also believe we should, this is a very personal thing. It's not a rule. I've read books that are not like that. But personally, I also want to write in a way that I convey the story, but I also don't traumatize readers that haven't been through this, you know? So in a way, it's like,
Yeah.
how do I share this in a way that I'm taking care of myself, but also taking
Mhm.
care of the reader? Like I'm sharing enough so they understand
Mhm.
the pain, they understand how difficult and how traumatic things were, but at the same time, I'm hoping they can go to sleep after, like that's what I think striking for that balance.
Yeah.
I don't need to show you things that were too painful for me, and you don't need to witness that pain or you know live
Yeah.
through
You
it
have a
if
great moment in Yeah, you have a great moment in Marriage Addiction 3 that you do this. You write, I remember things I don't want to remember that I don't want to write about. Consider them written to this space. And then there's a blank square. And it's
Mhm.
like this invitation for us as readers to be like, I love when a writer looks at me as a reader and says, okay, I get that I could go here, or I get that this is what you're asking for. I also am not going here. And I'm gonna be honest and transparent about that as opposed to dancing around it and being opaque. And so I think you do so much of that in the project, like even with that trigger warning in the beginning, which is like the most non-trigger warning, but also trigger warning at the same time, which I loved because I was like, oh, should I say trigger warning? Should I type it now? Like, is it not? And I think there's like a real generosity you offer the readers by being just looking at us and saying, hey, I know you're in this with me.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'm going to do a thing and sometimes I'm not. And I think that level of caretaking is so generous of you as a writer.
Oh, thank you. But I'm glad that you noticed because yeah, for sure, I don't know. It's something that I really care about. Yeah, I think I've read
Oh.
stuff that it was so it affect me so much, that I was like I felt it was not really necessary for me to know that, to
Mhm.
understand the story. But there are people that like it that way, and I respect that. But I think we can take care of each other.
Yeah. I'm going to pop over to the chat for a couple of questions. One from Caroline. I think you carry the generational trauma from all the women in your family in you, and that's portrayed here beautifully. I'm wondering if you ever thought about a more speculative memoir, looking ahead to a future daughter, for example, or do you see your own writing as rooted in realism, which is beautiful, Caroline?
Yeah, thank you for that question. At some point, I was considering something more speculative. So yeah, it's something that I've considered. I find specifically nonfiction that is speculative nonfiction. I find it fascinating. All these tools to write about things in a speculative way, even though it's like nonfiction. I think it's fascinating. So I've done the work of understanding it a little bit better because I'm very curious about it and definitely interested. I think specifically here, even though I played with the idea a little bit, I then moved away from it and decided to keep it more realistic. I think I'm very obsessed about realistic things because of what I've been mentioning. I do love connecting with the stories of others and me sharing stories, even though we can connect also in other ways, speculative and other um genres. But I don't know, it's something that I keep considering. So I think potentially the answer might be yes, I think so. I think, but on the other hand, probably I'm on the realistic side, but I think definitely yes. I think it's yes and no. Stay tuned.
Do you think you'll ever write a more speculative memoir, or are you done with memoir? Sometimes I feel like I talk to people who are like, I wrote one and I'm good here. So do you think you'd ever write one?
If I would ever write one,
Like a speculative
sorry, say that.
memoir?
Well, I don't know how to answer this because in a way it's like I hope I don't have to have life stories that are so hard that I need to make them speculative. I hope with this book I'm done with those.
Fair enough.
But at the same time, yeah, I think I'm interested. I mean, it's something that I find interesting, or at the very least, like having shorter pieces that play with speculative. I think it's fascinating what people are doing with speculative nonfiction.
Yeah. Another question in the chat is from Allison. As you developed the pieces and the collage of the book, did you publish any segments in lit mags as you went? Or if not, was that a strategic choice?
Yes, I have some pieces that were published before the book was published. And actually I took some fragments of pieces that were published and included them here without including the full piece. So I did both. Yes, for example, The Storm's Heat is like a hurricane story. Like that one was published in Grace and Gravity before. I have some poems that were published as well, like as just one, individual poems. Um, yeah, I think those were the one, like mostly poems or shorter pieces, and also the longer one. I think potentially, if I'm not mistaken, it was The Storm Seeds, potentially the only one of the longer ones. Then Marriage Addictions, but that was more like a little bit of a marketing thing. Like Marriage Addictions was published in Electric Literature right when my book was about to come out, but that was already,
Okay.
it was more like a publicist reaching out. And no, I think that one was opposite. I think they reached out to see if we could submit something like that. Anyway, thing is that Marriage Addiction got published, but it was closer to the book being published. So yes, the answer is like yes. Like I think if you have work that you can submit places, like it's as long, usually what they ask is like you acknowledge that it was published elsewhere when you include it in the book. But you can definitely share your work and submit your work and then still include it. Most cases you can still include it on your longer project.
I have a question. Do you have any, because again, like I said before, this book breaks so many of like, it fits all the genre categories really. And did you learn anything along the way about sort of publishing hybrid memoir that you care to share, or any advice for people who are, flexing the genres?
Mm-hmm. It's not as easy to publish books that are hybrid. And I was aware of it. And I shared this story, like I spoke with an agent before submitting my work to places. And she was like, your book is amazing, like you're talented, all of that. She said, but in order to publish it with a traditional publishing, it means like the big five or placing it in publishers that are bigger, you would, I think she said, I think you need more connective tissue, which means like it should be more narrative, and it should give more to readers rather than having readers also like kind of do some of the work. And then she was like, you have two options, like either you work on it and you pretty much make it more traditional, or you can publish it as is with an independent smaller press. And in my case, I knew the stories needed to be this way. Like I was willing to change order if my editors wanted another order. I was willing to perhaps write a little bit more if I needed to, but this was the spirit of this work and the form of this work. And I decided not to change it and, well, not have agent at the same time, because I wanted to be honest to what I was doing. And this was the most authentic way of this work. Then I submitted to smaller presses. My press is a university press. I think university presses are doing amazing work. I think independent presses in general are doing amazing work. So most of these presses, you don't need an agent. So that's also something that they usually take submissions from writers directly. So yeah, I think it's challenging if you want to work in a traditional way. I think there are people that are pushing boundaries. So I think potentially in a few years things will be different, because I think I've seen way much more. I think I'm sorry, I've been living in Spanish lately. I've seen way more work that is like hybrid, in or not necessarily fit into a genre specifically in the past, let's say 4 years or 5, than
Mm-hmm.
I've seen my whole life before. So I think there is some shift happening. But I think eventually, if you write more hybrid work or work that cannot be specifically attached to one one genre traditionally, I think definitely independent presses are the way to go. And I love the work they're doing overall. I think
Yeah.
I'm very happy with my press. They have been amazing. But overall, I feel they're doing very important work.
Yeah. I do love small press and independent presses for like the ways that they give so much permission. And they're like, well, we'll see what happens. And, your book was a National Book Critics Circle long list finalist. So, do what you want, people, and it will find the
Yeah,
right home.
I
Um,
totally with that. Yeah, that's how I think.
yeah. There's another question in the chat. What surprised you about your writing process for this book?
Say that again. Sorry, I didn't read it.
What
What's
surprised
her?
you in your writing? Yeah.
Mhm. I think in the process, well, first it was during the pandemic, so it surprised me that I could write outside of a coffee shop. I was a coffee shop
Fair.
writer before the pandemic. Yeah, I think what surprised me the most is like sometimes we try to fit ourselves within, the traditional way of doing things. What surprised me the most, I would say, is like trusting instincts and be led by your instincts. And eventually, I had no idea at many points what I was doing. I think the work just took a life of its own and eventually told me what it was. But I think like just trusting that that artistic, or like that gut that we have as writers or artists with our work, was my biggest surprise. Like eventually, even if I don't know the way, my work knows the way, and eventually I will notice what it is. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think I've heard a lot of fiction writers saying like, oh, the characters told me what they wanted to do or how they wanted to be. So I feel my whole book was like that. So being able to lose control and trust the work.
I love that because there is so much ordering of quote unquote chaos that happens when we're trying to make a book happen and we're trying to mold it so that it translates to readers. But I love the idea of just letting go and giving in and seeing what happens and surrender being part of the process.
Mhm. Surrendering, totally surrendering.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
really to the point that at some point what I was worried is like, oh my God, I have these pieces that are too fragmented, like the longer pieces. Like, how can I tie them up better or make them
Hmm.
more longer? And actually, the answer was like just keep breaking them apart even more. So it's opposite. Like it was opposite. It was opposite.
Yeah.
So I think at that point there is a point where you should lose your mind in a way, like not being so rational and working more with
Mhm.
instinct. I think like children, the way they play, they're not rationalizing every single thing they do.
But they're having such a good time, aren't they? I guess I'm looking at the time. So if there's one last question someone wants to drop in the chat, please do. Otherwise, I have one question that I wanted to ask, which is like, this book has been out since September, October,
November.
November. One of those fall months. I was going to get it right. I just had to keep going. Um, and you've answered, I'm sure, lots of questions about the book, about the process. What's one question that no one has asked or that you've wanted to answer that like hasn't come up?
Oh, I didn't think about that. Well, I think in a way, it's interesting because I don't know. I think talking about genres and craft and form, I think a lot of these decisions were also political. It was like I come
Mm.
from a colonized island. I come from Puerto Rico. We've been colonized on everything, and I'm, like women gender impositions, all of that. So I think I decided with this form and this genre that my writing was the only space that was not going to be colonized in my life. So I think related to craft, it was also that decision. Like, domination has been everywhere in many ways, but not in my writing. Even if that meant I'll print a few copies and give it to my friends to read them. So I think in that's my case, but I think for the bigger picture, I feel as writers we should really defend our work and what it should be. And even if that means we will have to pay certain consequences, right? Like I'm not signed with a big publisher. However, I'm very happy to be with an independent publisher. So I don't know in that case if I would have wanted this as a debut author. Um, but I think it's like defending our work and willing to pay the price for it. I think a lot of these decisions, in my case, were political, but your decisions might be other for many other reasons. But eventually, I think I see the writing like my kid. So I know like many moms will do anything and don't even dare to mess with my kids. So I feel that same way about writing. And I think trust ourselves and what we want to do with our work.
Wow, what a powerful way to end. I refuse for my writing to be colonized and defend your own work. I think those are incredible gifts for us who've been here this evening. Are there any final, I'm like, we have 5 minutes. I just want to make sure, are there any final things you want to say or any final questions that people want to offer? Oh, uh, what makes your contribution as a Boricua powerful? Something that you are proud of? This is from Erica in the chat.
I think primarily telling our stories and occupying space, taking space. I think for so long, not only Puerto Ricans, but also like people that are considered minorities, like usually we don't have space. But I think in Puerto Rico specifically, we don't have usually space in the Latin American work in Spanish, and also we don't have space in the US work in English. So we are isolated most of the time in our literary or writing endeavors. So I think taking space and also using English, even though it's not my language and I was not raised here, and I struggle with that a lot. But I think that was also a way of having our stories like known by more people. And I think I try in this book to show as much as I can that eventually it's not just my story, it's like our story and how our political situation impact the way we live and the way we relate to one another, and that we're here. And even we had a huge hurricane and a huge terrible political situation that tried to kill us, and yet we survived, we're here, and our stories matter. And I think that should be same for other identities, not only Puerto Rico, but in that case I'm speaking from my identity.
Could you close us out by reading the matriarchs, which is like the second to last page?
Yes. Second to last. Yes, just a second.
Yeah, on 123.
120. Yes, I will close with that. And before closing, I also want to, if you're interested in writing, find your people and find your community. I think that's, we put the seed, but the community around us put the water, the soil, like so many things. So we are who we are also thanks for our community, and they're there somewhere for you. Okay, the matrix. I hug you, abuelas, for all the worlds that you left behind. I hug myself for wanting to get where you couldn't, for being the woman you were not. Hug me in permission to create worlds in which I do not have to disappear in front of a stove, for wanting to know beds that don't always give me a roof, for not breastfeeding children nor sleeping grandchildren. Release me to walk the roads that I open for myself with your backs.
Thank you so much, Patricia.
Thank you,
And thank you
everyone.
everyone for coming this evening.